In order to fill Nyck de Vries' spot for the remainder of the season, Red Bull's senior team has loaned Ricciardo to sister team AlphaTauri, and Christian Horner, the team boss, says that he believes his Formula One comeback with AlphaTauri is the best opportunity for him to finally replace Sergio Perez in the Red Bull racing seat. Will Ricardo be able to surprise everyone? And more crucially, will he be able to succeed Perez as Red Bull's driver in 2025, or perhaps 2024? The protagonist from last week has finally spoken up for the first time since gaining another shot at F1 thanks to Red Bull and AlphaTauri. De Vries has only competed in 10 races. As a result of his dismal results, his contract has been cancelled. Due to this, Red Bull decided to lend their third driver, Daniel Ricciardo, to the Faenza-based team, where Ricciardo's career all began. Finally, Daniel Ricciardo has spoken about how he reacted when Red Bull Motorsport advisor Helmut Marko called and offered him a chance to rejoin Formula One with AlphaTauri. After a terrible 2-year stint with the Woking-based squad, McLaren fired the Australian. Ricciardo was contacted by Red Bull to be their third driver for the season instead, with a concentration on marketing possibilities like showruns. However, simulator work had increased recently, and a performance at the Pirelli tire test after the British Grand Prix was sufficient to show that he was ready to make a comeback to Formula One. Ricardo recalled his reaction when he saw Marko make the call. "I was like, okay, let's just hear what he has to say." That's probably the best thing, because sometimes you try to prepare yourself for, what if he asks me this? I didn't really need to think much about it. Being back in this family, I feel like I'm kind of going through it all again. These are the calls I used to get, and these are the moments they used to throw in front of us. There was no question I was going to say yes. It was just the reality of, okay, it is going to happen pretty soon. Daniel's return to the grid with a backmarker team goes against his earlier claims that he was only concerned with earning a competitive slot. Ricardo just sees this as a means to an end, according to Horner, who also revealed that Ricardo's ultimate goal is to join Red Bull Racing alongside Max Verstappen. And Horner has consistently stated that both will remain with Red Bull Racing for that year. Ricardo's goal is currently being considered in terms of succeeding Perez in 2025. However, Ricardo only committed to a 1-year deal with Red Bull for his off-track Red Bull post. Therefore, his transfer to AlphaTauri is merely for the remainder of the current campaign. Ricardo's action, according to Horner, is a part of a long-term plan. There's no thoughts or expectations beyond that, Horner said on F1's Hungarian GP preview episode of the F1 Nation podcast. We've loaned him to AlphaTauri to the end of the year. Obviously, our drivers are going to be Max and Checo again next year, but it's always good to have talent in reserve. I think the way Daniel is viewing AlphaTauri, he firmly wants to be pitching for that 2025 Red Bull. That's his golden objective. And by going to AlphaTauri, I think he sees that as his best route of stating his case for 2025. After leaving McLaren, Ricardo declined offers to remain in Formula One with midfield teams because the agonizing experience of spending 2 years primarily struggling alongside Lando Norris made him desperate for a break from the sport to try to understand what went wrong and whether he even wanted to be a part of the championship any longer. While he claimed that 17 years of being full-on since entering the European junior racing scene have done him the world of good, going back to the team that helped launch his early career and put him in Formula One has demonstrably proven to be the best option for assuring that mental boost. The F1 video gave the impression he is in a much better mental place than before his Red Bull return. He has always been honest and professional in his media appearances at both the worst and best times of his career. But the enthusiasm and serenity with which he reflected on the last 12 months and what's ahead stood out. Falling out of a bit of love with it was that I took a bit of a hit on my confidence, Ricardo said of his feelings about F1 at the end of 2022. And of course, if you're competing in a sport where you're trying to be the best in the world at something, you obviously need full confidence, full belief, all of it. And when that starts to diminish a little bit, the enjoyment starts to drop as well. There were just a lot of factors. And then getting back to Red Bull and just kind of the reception I had walking back into that team was, in a positive way, a little bit overwhelming. And then getting back on the sim, I was still a bit unsure how it was going to go, if the car would feel like it used to, and if I was going to be, for the lack of better words, like the old me. Once I'd done a few sim sessions and started to feel like myself again, it then just brought me back to normal Daniel, where I was falling back in love and ready to go again. He explained how, after going to the Super Bowl in February, the atmosphere of being at a major sporting event brought back some of the things that had made him love his own career. However, for the first few F1 races he went to as Red Bull reserve, he was still trying to determine whether or not his own competitiveness and motivation had slowly burned away. I gave myself the time, figured it all out, and then it's like you wake up one day, it's that feeling where you're like, okay, it's go time, he said. And that was the mentality after a couple of months off. Okay, it's time to build this thing back up. In addition, Horner claimed that giving Ricciardo de Vries' spot over someone like teenage driver and Super Formula title contender Liam Lawson was a result of accurately assessing Ricciardo. Horner claimed that studying Ricciardo was the most fascinating option from a Red Bull racing perspective, even though Lawson would be a better fit for what is still effectively a Red Bull training ground. This is certainly connected to the possibility that Ricciardo will shortly take over the second Red Bull seat. But for the time being, Perez appears to have Red Bull's complete backing. Horner acknowledges that Ricciardo's ultimate goal is to replace Perez, but he avoids specifically addressing that prospect. So there are conflicting messages throughout, but this may be the plan to dissuade the media from tracking down Perez. When asked what Perez would think if he saw Ricciardo vying for his position, Horner specifically addressed Perez's recent performance and stressed the need of aiding him in breaking his streak of 5 consecutive failures to qualify for Q3 and restarting his season. Some of that has been bad luck, some of it's been a little self-inflicted, Horner said. We're just trying to help him through that period. He's still second in the World Championship. He's won 2 races so far out of the 10 this year, and he started the season in such great form. We just want to help him rediscover that form. According to accounts, when Ricardo returned to the simulator, Red Bull was astounded by how much his driving had been influenced by his time with McLaren. Given how unfair the Pirelli-controlled setup parameters and tire compounds will have been at such a test, reports that he was incredibly quick in his Red Bull tire test this week on the day his comeback was announced should be taken with a grain of salt. However, the fact that Red Bull is willing to put him back in one of its F1 cars suggests it is confident he is driving well again. Will it, however, be sufficient? Why then do we go back to the grid? What is Ricardo's grander strategy? Well, Ricardo's return with AlphaTauri coincides with a string of issues for Sergio Perez, who has watched his dominant Red Bull teammate surge away unopposed in the championship, despite Perez's repeated failures to even qualify for Q3. Perez had hinted with victories in Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan that he really might challenge Max Verstappen for the title. What do you anticipate? Will Ricardo start off strong? Will Ricardo join Red Bull again in 2024? Please share your opinions in the comments section below.